You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. Thursday night's ending to the White Sox game was one of the stupidest endings, was one of the worst calls that I've seen in Major League Baseball in a long time. And what's funny about it is it doesn't matter in a lost season. So, you don't want to be too indignant and scream about it. But let's just go through this real quick before we get into what I wanted to do on this show, Ed. Because we're talking about it here as we're setting up to do this episode of Sox in the Basement, brought to you by Cork and Carry at the Park, 33rd and Princeton, in the shadow of the ballpark. Ballpark favorites, incredible bar, great place to hang out before and after the game. It's a great place to bring families. They got indoor seating, they got outdoor seating. The wait staff really friendly with the kids. They've got all kinds of items there for them. Save yourself a couple of bucks. Start the party early. And who cares if you miss the first inning? This team isn't that good. And get over to 33rd and Princeton. And don't worry, you won't miss the first inning. Cork and Carry at the Park. Very good about looking at the clock and understanding, I got to get this food out, I got to get this bill out, and I got to get these people into the ballpark. They do an excellent job of that. See more at corkandcarry.com. But to take you through it, my friend, and jump in if I miss something here.
You got runners on first and second with one out. Andrew Benintendi at the plate.
Okay, so you've got
Andrew Vaughn is at second.
Terrible hitter that's basically stealing money from Jerry Reinsdorf for the next several years, up there about to do absolutely nothing in the middle of a comeback. And he does absolutely nothing.
Getting a hit would have been ideal. That would have been great. But popping out basically the next most harmless thing that Andrew Benintendi could have done, assuming he wasn't going to get a hit.
All right, and from what we can tell, looking at it, it looks like infield fly is called,
and that's what was discussed on the broadcast too, is that infield fly had been called. An infield fly is called in that situation for exactly the reason the infield fly rule exists, which is to prevent an infielder like Gunnar Henderson from intentionally letting the ball hit the ground, knowing that Andrew Vaughn is then hung up because he can't run to third in that situation. So the force is at third. I forget who was on first, but he can't run to second because the force is on at second. So Henderson would have an easy double play there.
Right. Henderson would go to third over to second, game over. So that occurs. You have a situation where Vaughn just walks back to second base, just takes a natural path back to second base. And Gunnar Henderson running for a ball that he no longer needs to catch. And I think that's the key. No longer needs to catch the ball. Gunnar comes up and has to sidestep Vaughn to run over and actually make a catch. Now, here's the problem I have with the interference call.
And also, when you look at it, barely sidestep Vaughn. I mean, he took a circular route to the ball, which is actually not even all that unexpected, frankly.
So here's the problem I have with the call. First off, it's really ticky-tack interference, but even if I assume that it is, the first thing out of Pedro's mouth when he gets to the crew chief, the home plate umpire, whoever it is, I don't know where they were all positioned on the field where the crew chief was, if he was the home plate umpire, but when he gets out there, the first thing he's got to do is say, the play was dead. You have an out already. Henderson doesn't need to make the catch. That's the essence of an infield fly. The batter is instantly out. So how can you interfere with a player that doesn't need to make the catch anymore? He could just stand there now, the thing could fall in the middle of the field, nobody could be around it, somebody would pick up the ball, and we would move on. The runners can advance at their own peril, but it could have just landed there and somebody runs over and picks it up. The batter is still out. So how do you interfere with a player who no longer needs to make the catch so he can't be interfered with? And I feel like that's the only way you win an argument with an umpire. You have to give the umpires a way out. I love the lip reading things that John Boy will do. And there was one recently where an umpire was jawing back and forth with the bench, told everybody to be quiet. Then he heard something from the bench and he says, somebody's out. And the manager comes running out and says, who? Who said it? Who said the bad thing? Who? And he goes, I don't know. Just pick one of the bench players. Just pick one of your position players. Anyone will do, but somebody has to leave. And the crew chief comes over, and you can tell the crew chief realizes the home plate umpire is screwed up because he has no idea who he threw out. And he explains to the manager, we have to throw somebody out. Like, we can't look stupid here. We can't say you're out of the game and nobody leaves. You have to give the umpires an out. If you go and make that argument, which it doesn't look like Pedro's doing. I'd love to see a breakdown of him because it looks like he just runs out and goes, huh? What? Huh? Because he hasn't figured out why it's the wrong call. He just knows something wrong. If he was smart enough to say, the infield fly was called, doesn't matter if he catches it or not, so how can you interfere with him? It gives the crew chief an opportunity to say, did you hear infield fly? Oh, maybe I didn't hear that. You're right. It gives them an out. If you never give an umpire an ability to not look stupid, they're going to stick with their call, even if they realize right there in their moment that they're wrong. So I put the majority of it on the fact that the umpire screwed up, but then I look at the manager of this team, who you know I have a bad opinion of, and I go, that looked like a really bad argument, filled with grunts and noises and no reason. And he's got to come out there knowing why that's a bad play, and that's a bad call, Ed.
And he's got to be aware, I can... You pointed out something very, very kind of important in that, it's not the same umpire calling infield fly who calls the interference. I don't think that that's what happened, because if that happens, that is the all-time dumbest umpire in the history of baseball. And Angel Hernandez exists, and that's not who was umping at second base last night. This is one of those situations where if the second base umpire didn't hear the home plate umpire call infield fly or the third base ump call infield fly, then you could sort of understand where the umps, maybe they do need to get together and sit there and say, well, wait, did you call infield fly? Well, I did. Oh, okay. Well, then, yeah, runner safe, there's no interference because the play was dead. But if you're right, if Pedro just comes out and goes, what's the call? What happened? What's the call? And Pedro doesn't seem to understand, or he doesn't come immediately and go out and go, that ball was dead. That was a dead ball. You called infield fly, and start screaming at him. The umps, you're right. The umps are going to sit there and go, okay, well, the crew chiefs are, I don't know what the hell is going on, and the umps are going to look at each other and go, I don't know, we made the call. And
I think we're saying it wrong because I've done it and you've done it. The ball isn't dead. I'm sorry about that. The ball isn't dead.
Right.
They can still advance at their own peril. And in reality, if the catch is made, they can continue to run. Like Vaughn could have, at that point tagged up and tried to run to third and been out at third on a terrible play. Like theoretically, something like that could have happened. But the idea is he doesn't need to make the catch anymore. So how can he be interfered with? Us on the phone line right now, a guy who probably sat there in stunned silence watching the end of that game. He puts up all the interesting tidbits and trivia on the scoreboard. Dave Marin, the Sox Nerd, joins us, and he's brought to you by the Village of Lamont. Want to experience a downtown with real history, great eats and drinks, and green spaces filled with adventure? Visit the Village of Lamont. Shop, dine, drink, explore, and see everything they have going on this weekend and beyond at lamontdowntown.com. Nerd, how are you?
Fantastic, Chris. How are you? And before I get to my thing, I just want to say yes. The great thing about that ending last night was that no matter how many baseball games you've watched, one game will always give you something completely new. And that's exactly what happened last night.
It was new because it made no sense. He doesn't need to make the catch. He doesn't need to make. How can you interfere with a play that no longer exists?
No one knew what to make of it. Chris? As if this season weren't tough enough, the schedule maker had to go and give the Sox back-to-back series against the Orioles and Blue Jays. In addition to these being talented teams now, they are responsible for two of the most frustrating playoff losses in team history. The series in 1983 against Baltimore and the series 10 years later against Toronto provide Sox fans with two of the greatest what-ifs ever. First, 1983. The White Sox should have won this best-of-5 ALCS for one reason and one reason alone. They had Lamar Hoyt, and the Orioles did not. Hoyt, that season's Cy Young winner with a whopping 24 wins, pitched a gem in the series opener, firing a 5-hitter with no walks and 5 strikeouts in the Sox 2-1 win in Baltimore. From there, the winning ugly Sox offense went dormant, allowing Baltimore to win 3 straight and the pennant. The Sox lost Game 4 on an absolutely soul-crushing homer by Tito Landrum off Britt Burns, who had pitched 9 brilliant innings before giving up the 3-run bomb. What if the Sox had gotten to Game 5? They would have had peak Lamar Hoyt pitching for the pennant at home. I like the Sox chances in that one. My next what if is a little more nuanced, but has gnawed at me for 31 years. In 1993, the Sox had even the best of 7 ALCS with Toronto at 2 and had ace Jack McDowell on the bump for Game 5. In the first inning, McDowell tried to pick off Ricky Henderson at second and threw the ball away, allowing Henderson to score with the game's first run. What if McDowell hadn't made that error and the Sox, who clearly had the momentum in that series, had gotten out of the inning still tied? Instead, it was the Jays who seized the momentum and won 5-3. They clinched the pennant in Chicago 2 days later. On a less nuanced scale, what if the Sox had won Game 6 in Chicago and then turned to the red-hot Wilson Alvarez, the best pitcher in baseball, for the second half of 1993 for Game 7 at home? Ugh, these are the moments from Sox history that torment me from time to time. Before I get to my zinger, I remind you, pearls like these can be found on my blog, which can be accessed at soxinthebasement.com and on the scoreboard at Guaranteed Rate Field. My zinger? Last night was Illini night at the ballpark. And on that night, I always like to point out that the White Sox, then known as the White Stockings, played their first game as a Chicago team against the University of Illinois on April 2nd, 1900. Playing in Champaign, the Sox prevailed 10-9. Others with Sox ties to the U of I are Don Paul, Mark D'Alessandro, Gene Honda, and Chris's daughter. That's it, Chris. More than you wanted to know about 1983, 1993, what ifs, and the Sox history with ILLINI.
That's right. And me. I went to the University of Illinois.
How could I forget? And Chris Lanuti.
My kid got a mention and not me. She's smarter than me. I got in undeclared. She got into the College of Architecture. She's a little bit ahead of Dad.
There you go.
Sox in the Basement listeners, for exterior windows, doors, patio doors, and storm doors, look no further than Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest. I'm going to be giving them a call after this weekend because some teenager was at a graduation party at my house and didn't know how to open up one of my windows, and I think I'm going to have to replace it. Just a heads up to the staff over there, I'm going to be stopping in. They've been there in Oak Forest since 1985, half block east of 159th and Ridgeland at 6280 159th Street. No high pressure sales. They're not coming into your house. You're going to see them. That way, I and you can see every example right there. I'll know exactly what it's going to look like. There's an owner in showroom and on site. They use all their own installers. 159th and Ridgeland, just a half block east of there at 6280 159th Street. See more at windowdooroakforest.com. Blowing through the ads on this Memorial Day weekend show, mainly because I wanted to get the Sox Nerd because he watched that debacle, but let's move on from that and get into what I wanted to do on the show, Ed.
You want you and I to be the Bobs from Office Space and find out what people actually do here, right?
Well, I want to kind of do a job interview for everybody. It's Memorial Day weekend. My dad used to say, still does, he's still alive. My dad says, and has been saying it since I was a little kid, when you get to Memorial Day, that's your team. When you get to Memorial Day weekend, that's what that player is this year. And I think anybody saying, oh, he's just in a slump or off to a rough start at this point, those are the same people that I remember years ago told me that Adam Dunn would revert back to his baseball card that year. That didn't happen.
Not really.
So look, you are what you are, generally, 99.9% of the time, by the time you get to this point. As a team, as a player, everybody is what they is. If you're off to a slow start, like Colson Montgomery was down in the minors, and then you get hot, people sit there and say, okay, that was a slow start. What Andrew Benintendi is doing and Andrew Vaughn is doing, that's not a slow start. That's what they are. So I want to go around the horn with a roster that's seen a lot of new guys show up, kind of build a little bit off of what we talked about in the last episode, with a lot of young players that really should be getting more time, and kind of interview people for positions on this team for the rest of the year. And I'll start with low-hanging fruit. Catcher. We have a catcher in Corey Lee, who I think is definitely a part of your future battery. I don't know how his season is going to end up. He was up over 300 a few days ago. He's only had 106 plate appearances. That's going to fluctuate a little bit. He struck out 27 times to 6 walks. That's got to be worked on. But he plays really good defense. He's got an above average OPS as we sit here. He's hitting 270, and that's a dip right now off of what he had been just a week ago. And I think when this season ends, we're going to see a very nice player at the age of 25, a former first-round draft pick, and a guy that is part of my battery in one way or another for many years to come. And then you have Martin Maldonado, who would like that starting job, and I think it's very obvious we wouldn't give it to him. The only question I have, is there anybody else that you would replace Maldonado with, I'll say? I think it's very obvious that Lee has to stay and should be starting. But is Maldonado somebody who stays on this team? Or would you sit there and say, no, enough's enough with that one. We need to bring up somebody from the minor leagues and let them play. Edgar Caro's not available. I'll throw that out there.
No. I mean, really, honestly, at this point, if it's going to be Corey Lee's team and he's going to be the starter, then your backup catcher in almost every situation is usually a guy that has a lot of wisdom and game experience and all that stuff, and generally sucks, right? I mean, that's what a backup catcher is.
Hey, that's Martin Maldonado.
Yeah, I mean, that's generally what a backup catcher is. Just a guy that can be a decent receiver, can give Corey Lee a break here and there. And I'll say this, I mean, the 27 strikeouts to 6 walks, I'm not really worried about how often Corey Lee walks, but his strikeout rate right now is around 25%, which is pretty average for the league. So I'm actually pretty pleased with that. And it's not something that I'm overly worried about. And I do think, he's going to hover 270. He'll get hot a little bit. He'll probably dip below 270 for a little bit. This is his rookie year. So, this is a good showing for a rookie. And at Memorial Day, you kind of have a feeling like this is his arrival.
All right. So now, because of Eloy Jimenez's injury, it would be a cheap and easy thing to do, which is probably what Pedro will do, the cheap and easy thing, to say, well, just put Gavin Sheets now as a DH, and Andrew Vaughn is, of course, going to start every day at first base. But I would like to approach this as, what's left after we find all the starting position players that could be a DH? And let's see, if we use that test, is Andrew Vaughn on the bench? Does he make the team? Okay.
Right.
So your first base options very clearly, very obviously, are Andrew Vaughn hitting 194 with a 550 OPS. Or Gavin Sheets hitting 248 with a 767 OPS, which ain't that great. And he's been kind of sliding lately, but he's still serviceable. And I'll take a guy hitting 248 playing first base with a 767 OPS, whose walks to strikeouts, 23 walks to 28 strikeouts. That's good.
A 363 on base percentage for Gavin Sheets. That's a helpful offensive player, even though he's not hitting the ball for much power right now.
Yes, Andrew Vaughn, 12 walks to 46 strikeouts and a 255 OBP.
That is terrible.
All right, any argument? Do you have any argument for why Andrew Vaughn should be starting over Gavin Sheets at first base?
At this point, no. It's not necessarily an indictment of Andrew Vaughn, who I think has been mishandled, but this is not a guy that has a track record that you can look at and sit there and go, yeah, but remember last year when he was really, really good, or 2 years ago when he was really, really good, something might be wrong, he's never really arrived in the majors. And now I think it's got to be at least somewhat mental if there's no physical issue. He needs to hit the reset button hard before he's on this team. I really wholeheartedly believe, you and I have been thumping for this, he needs some time in Charlotte. He needs a new change, a change of scenery to get himself right.
All right. So now Brian Ramos should be back very shortly because he's on a rehab start. He's on he's going to do a couple minor league games, and they're telling us he's coming back. And when he comes back, he's clearly the better play over Danny Mendick hitting 217 with a 604 OPS. I'm not even going to have that argument. So let's say we put him over at third base. Now the fun part. Look at second base and short and start ranking the infielders in order of importance and how they should be out there, assuming they can all play every position. Mendick could probably stand at short. Lopez can probably move over to short if need be, right? DeYoung can move over to second base. I mean, all these guys can be moved around. You got guys down in the minor leagues. I mean, Montgomery, I'm not waiting for him to get here just as much as I don't think Moncada's coming back as soon as they're trying to make you think he's coming back. I think he's definitely gone until the All-Star break at least. So what we have right now available in your middle infield between the majors, the bench, the starters that are currently out there, the bench, the minor leagues, let's start ranking them. Who's the most valuable one right now in your mind, right off the top of your head?
Well, Ramos.
No, besides Ramos. He's at third.
Oh, besides Ramos. Oh, so amongst the middle infielders?
Yeah.
Well, DeYoung is the guy that I'm looking at has been the most consistent. I mean, I know he's only hitting 237.
He's the only one with an OPS over league average.
And he is what he is. Career-wise, he is what he is. He strikes out a ton, but he hits homers, and he's leading the team. And his 237 average is better than it's been in years past. So I'm okay with Paul DeYoung right now, manning shortstop, because he's just a bridge.
Speaking of bridges, use something better than just a bridge when it comes to insuring your home, your car. Here's the deal. When you combine State Farm home and auto insurance, you save an average of $889. State Farm agent John Harrell is ready to help you combine home and auto and save in the Chicagoland area. Call him today, 708-481-4500. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Average annual per household savings based on a 2019 national survey by State Farm of new policyholders who reported savings by switching to State Farm. Now, when we look at Paul DeYoung and we go, well, he's a veteran, right? And like at some point we want to let the kids play. All of these middle infielders are old. DeYoung's 30, Mendick's 30.
Oh, yeah.
Nicky Lopez is 29. Where's Remillard? He's old, 30 years old. So all the guys that are middle infielders basically on the team, Remillard and Mendick and DeYoung and Lopez are 29 or 30 years old. So there is no like, well, we want to let this kid play or I want to see what he develops into. Again, we've got a bunch of players that are what they are. So after DeYoung, who I will make the argument until I'm blue in the face for the rest of the year, is your second baseman when they do eventually bring Colson Montgomery up. And I think that will happen in the back half of this year. Who comes next? Who's the other guy that should be getting the most playing time on this team in an infield of Gavin Sheets on one corner, Brian Ramos on the other corner, and DeYoung standing at short?
I don't think it matters. I mean, unless you bring up Lenyn Sosa, I don't think it makes a difference.
Well, that's an interesting argument. So now here's the thing. Lopez, at this point, again, we're going into Memorial Day weekend, 222 with a 518 OPS and an on-base percentage of 281. Danny Mendick, 217 with a 604 OPS and an on-base percentage of 254. I mean, these are basically the same player.
Remillard's got the best stats out of all of them. I mean, he's 280 with an 800 OPS.
You know what I always thought was really weird? Well, it's a small sample size, but I always thought it was really weird that it felt like this guy did show something last year with this manager. This manager was not in a hurry to put him on his team, or the general manager wasn't. You know, it's a small sample size, 280, 400 on base percentage, 800 OPS, but it's only over the course of what, 31 plate appearances. So I mean, like that all could change very quickly. So I don't know if I just look at his stats blindly and say that that's the guy. I don't want Braden Shoemake back up, and I don't think,
no.
And here's the thing. I don't know what I feel about Lenyn Sosa anymore.
Well, here's the thing. Here's what I would say. Zach Remillard is 30. He's a journeyman, but give the guy a chance then to see if that 280 is the start of something sustainable or if it's just a flash in the pan and he's just gotten lucky in a small sample size, and let him figure it out.
The other infield job, along with DeYoung, with Ramos on one corner and Sheets on the other corner, is Remillard. So you're going Sheets, Remillard, DeYoung, Ramos starting next week as your everyday infield.
Why not? Because the worst case scenario, you have Nicky Lopez, who is at least competent in the field. And, you know, we know what he is at bat. And if Nicky Lopez settles into a utility role on this team or ends up having to start for a little while here and there, it's second base almost becomes a throwaway position at that point. But again, we're in a lost season, so why not let Zach Remillard sit there and see if he's a late blooming guy that, you know, you still have under control for a couple of years?
You do. And the interesting thing is that they're going to have to get rid of Mendick or Lopez to bring Ramos back on theoretically, and they might do something else. But I mean, like if they just want to swap infielder for infielder, somebody's got to go.
And honestly, I like Danny Mendick a lot. And I wish he had a better opportunity with the White Sox before his knee injury, or at least after his knee injury, that they'd given him a chance. But if he gets DFA'd, he's not the future for this team. He's a nice story.
Yeah, I think you let him go. Okay, let's look at the outfield. I believe Robert's back in the next week or so.
Well, Tommy Pham has still earned his place.
And I feel like what's going to happen here, and this is why you can't automatically give Vaughn the first base job, because you shouldn't just say, well, we'll move Sheets to DH. What you should be doing is saying Vaughn's in the mix for DH. Let's see what we have left after we fill out the outfield. Because I think what we're going to get to is we're going to get to a situation where Vaughn and Benintendi have to fight for who's going to be the guy that's in the lineup with that DH spot. Even if they appear in the field from time to time, which really they shouldn't. They're not, like, especially Benintendi, not a great outfielder, right? But like that extra spot should be those two competing against each other at this point. One of them's on the bench and the other one's in the lineup because they both are terrible. Not both of them up at the top of your lineup, and I think that's what we're going to find.
This is really just an Andrew problem this team has.
We have an Andrew problem.
We got a big Andrew problem.
So when Robert comes back, we got Robert and we've got Pham definitely in the outfield. Bar none, no question about it, Robert and Pham are in the outfield. So you have one outfield spot. You have a guy you're paying $75 million over 5 years who's early on in his deal in year 2, who can't hit the broadside of a barn with a baseball bat. He's one of your options in Andrew Benintendi. You have Dominic Fletcher, a kid that you traded for that had a really nice at-bat when he finally got a chance to get in the game the other day. Like, worked a count. Didn't do the thing he was doing the first time up. Like, instead was patient. Wasn't going for pitches that were tailing outside of the zone. Looked like he had learned something. And remember, you valued him enough that you traded away a pretty nice prospect to get him and handed him the starting job. So there's something to be said for, are you really giving up on him this early on? Or does he deserve playing time? Corey Julks is a 28-year-old kid that was blocked because of the Astros being so good in the outfield, who has done nothing but show up and prove that he deserves a look. And I think Zach DeLoach will be the guy that unfortunately is the odd man out that they'll send right back down. But here's a guy who's been doing fairly well down in the minor leagues. So you listen to all those young guys. You want to keep Pham in the order because you enjoy the run scoring. You could make an argument that, like, hey, let's just start playing young guys. Okay. And I don't know if I'd argue with you about it. But in that last outfield spot, we're looking at guys like Fletcher. We're looking at Julks. We're looking at DeLoach. And we're looking at Andrew Benintendi. You can make the argument that two of them get to play every night if you put Andrew Vaughn on the bench and use one as a DH and one as that third outfielder.
Right. And I think at this point, what I'm looking at is I'm looking at least in the outfield sense, I might be looking at a Corey Julks, Dominic Fletcher platoon, and I'm not sure it's going to be a straight platoon where Fletcher plays against every righty and Julks only plays against lefties, because that I don't know that that's how you want to shake that out. I'd give Corey Julks some run against some right-handers too, but I think that those two guys split some time. In an ideal world, you have a manager who's got enough information and a brain to play matchup ball with those two. And let
in an ideal world,
yeah, and let them both find their way, right? Because you're right, Corey Julks deserves a shot, and he had a decent minor league career. He was never going to be on the Astros because they're just too stacked. That team is just way too stacked. And Fletcher, we forget because he had such an awful start to the season what Dominic Fletcher had showed as a member of the Diamondbacks, both in the minors and in the major leagues last year. So give that kid an opportunity to prove that last year wasn't a fluke and that he really is that player, because he is the kind of guy that becomes a bit of a cornerstone player for you. Maybe not a star, but definitely a guy that you come to rely on. A pillar of your lineup, if you will. An actual pillar of your lineup.
Well, that's the thing. I want to see those guys play over Benintendi and Vaughn. And if the hang-up is we're paying Benintendi too much money to just have him ride the pine and we're not going to DFA him, and nobody's going to take him in a trade, then I go back to the thing of you already have your first baseman, and it's really clear that Gavin Sheets at 28 years old has outplayed Andrew Vaughn at 26 years old. And that when you got drafted shouldn't matter. It's what you do at the major league level. And I'm looking at an Andrew Vaughn who, this season alone, I mean, let's just remind you of what he's done this season alone. He's almost a -1 B-WAR so far as we enter Memorial Day weekend. And we have a guy who hit over the last 28 days, 217 with a 625 OPS. Over the last 14 days, 196 with a 673 OPS. And over the last week, 125 with a 317 OPS. For the year, he's hitting 194. His stats are getting worse. More recently, he's actually getting worse as the season goes on. He was playing better a month ago than he's playing right now. And you continue to trot him out there, and it's been several months now. We're into the season. We're a quarter way through the season at this point. He is what he is. Use this man's option. Send him down there like the Astros sent Jose Abreu down, who had accomplished far more than Andrew Vaughn, And you're going to have to make room because you don't have any room for him in this lineup, especially when Robert is back and Ramos is back. That's the thing. If you listen to the names that are coming back, well, Ramos is going to come over and stand at third base. Well, yeah, that's a no-brainer. Robert's going to come back and be in the outfield. Well, yeah, that's a no-brainer. You're running out of space. Even with Eloy Jimenez's injury, and trust me, Chris Getz, realizing he probably won't be able to trade Eloy, is probably thankful that Eloy is going to be out now for at least a month or so because it makes room and takes away an uncomfortable decision.
Space, yeah.
Yeah, it makes space because you need space to let some of these players get opportunities in a lost season. And so him getting injured, I'm telling you, everybody's like, oh, he can't stay healthy. And I'm kind of like, I actually, under my breath, I was like, well, thank you. That actually worked out, right? Because he's not part of my long term. It's an uncomfortable thing to say because of what he meant early on and what you thought he was going to be. My father just complains constantly, like, I thought this guy was going to be the next Big Papi, the way he went up there and looked at the plate. You know, doesn't have the same body type, but like just the way that he crushed baseballs.
But remember, when he hurt himself on that stupid play where he jumped at the wall in spring training, and it was way over his head anyway.
Tore the muscle in his, like, around his ribs or whatever, right? Wasn't that it?
And he tears that muscle, tears the chest, and tears the muscle in his torso. And, you know, there were rumors and rumblings around that, you know, guys don't come back from that and are ever the same guy.
We talked about it. We
talked about it.
We did. We compared it to the idea of Ron Kittle, remember, where he's rookie of the year. Yes. And then Ron's been on this show before, and he's like, then I got hurt, and then I was never the same player again. I could never do the same thing. It changed the entire trajectory of my career. And that's what happened to Eloy Jimenez. And hitting .231 with a below league average OPS and constantly injured at the age of 27, it's a gift to Chris Getz that his hamstring is all torn up again, and he gets to get him out of the way so he can play other players.
Right. And you know, Eloy's legs and all that stuff. I mean, I think some of that is conditioning. Some of that's got to be, you know, because he's not playing the field. He's not taxing himself. He's running the bases, and you got to be able to run the bases. You don't even have to be fast, okay? Paul Konerko made an entire career of being one of the slowest human beings you're ever going to see run, even though he wasn't like a big fat dude or anything like that. He was really, you know, he's in good shape.
All right, so essentially the final ruling is we've got guys like Remillard should be getting more playing time. We've got Jokes and Fletcher should be getting that third outfield spot in the platoon and sometimes even bleeding into the DH role. Andrew Vaughn should go to the minors, and Andrew Benintendi survives only because you're paying him a bunch of money, and Jerry Reinsdorf doesn't want to just pay him to sit at home, but you're not giving him an everyday role. That seems like a pretty logical way.
I think that works, doesn't
to approach this team. They won't do it, Ed, but it's the most logical way to do it.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.